All right. Hello, I'm Reverend Matt, and today we are going to speak of the devil. In fact, let's get this out of the way right here at the beginning. On three, everyone please say the devil. 1, 2, 3. Thank you. This concludes the audience participation part of this show tonight. Don't worry. Now, according to certain folk traditions, we've all just done something that you're not supposed to do. The devil appears when his name is called. Speak of the devil, and up he jumps. No good himself does a listener hear. Speak of the devil, he's sure to appear. The right-thinking person, you understand, is advised not to think of evil, but rather to focus one's thoughts on good. Well, funny on the right-thinking person then, because the devil is, of course, one of the most popular subjects of art and thought in the last 2,000 years of Western history. I can offer but a thumbnail tonight. If I were to simply list every book, play, essay, song, television show, movie, artwork, and delicious dessert that had the devil as its topic, and thus something to say about him, just by their titles, with no accompanying commentary, we would be here for 75 hours. I just accidentally capitalized him while I was typing this, and that's a real bad sign for my eternal soul. But anyway, I must here edit and summarize. Even just the names he goes by are numberless. There's the devil, from the Greek diabolos, which means to throw across, which was a metaphor for slander. Thus the devil is the slanderer, though one minority interpretation has it that this is actually a reference to God throwing him out of heaven, like a bouncer or perhaps overhand. Then, of course, there's Satan, literally opponent or adversary in Hebrew, and Lucifer, Greek for lightbringer, a reference to his previously exalted status. Then, of course, there is the enormous variety of comic folklore names. Jack Scratch, Gentleman Jack, Old Horny, Old Nick, Lusty Dick, Lusty Dickens, Booger Man, which I guess I'd rather not think about. Old Nick is a particularly popular one here, though its derivation is the subject of some debate. It has been claimed that it comes from Saint Nicholas and was coined by Puritans who were opposed to the debauched and impious celebration of Christmas, because some Puritans weren't kidding around. In these days, we have the put Christ back in Christmas sorts, but these people wanted to put Christ back into picking your nose. It has also been suggested that Old Nick comes from a name used for the devil in plays in the Middle Ages, Old Iniquity, though frankly this sounds more like a brand of rum that is somewhat irreverent. And then, of course, there are the very sexy polysymbolic names, Beelzebub and Mephistopheles and Adramelech and so on, though these are more often thought about by people who spend a lot of time thinking about such things as other demons besides Satan and so forth. These other demons are quite numerous, certainly. Estimations as to their numbers vary, though the 15th century tabulation of Cardinal Bishop of Tusculum numbers the fallen angels at 133,306,668, which is roughly 1/3 of the estimated human population of the earth at that time, and certainly sufficient for your demon needs. There are a number of recurring personalities. Abaddon, or Apollyon, who we discussed the other day, is the leader of the demon locusts, which look like horses with human heads and scorpion tails, and I'm feeling like maybe they didn't know what locusts were. Raum, or Haborim, appeared as a crow. His mission was to destroy cities, like Godzilla, and to subvert the dignities of men. So, here in 2020, nice work, Haborim. Bealberith was the pontiff of hell and also its notary, which sounds silly, but actually there is quite a lot of paperwork. Belial is often thought of as hell's lawyer. Here he is dancing for Solomon. And I guess if I had access to an actual Duke of Hell, my first priority maybe wouldn't be to get served, but I'm not here to tell Solomon what to do. He is famously very wise. Samael's name meant poison angel, which is totally rad, and I briefly pursued the possibility that his name was the origin of the folksy exclamation, "What the Sam Hill?" Alas, there appears to be no relationship, and the origin of this phrase is debated. Some believe it to be a corruption of salmon hell, which is an afterlife of eternal punishment and torment for salmon, I guess. Others cite an actual Sam Hill, a surveyor in 19th century Michigan who used profanity so constantly and elaborately that his name came to be associated with the concept, and I will never have an achievement that equals this. But I digress. Some of Satan's friends and relations had extremely impressive descriptions. Pourson was a man with a lion's face, carrying a viper and riding a bear. Marcosius was a wolf with griffin's wings and a serpent's tail. Adramelech was a hybrid of a peacock and a mule. Look, they can't all be gems. Many were recorded in terms of what they could teach the sorcerer who summoned them, or other services they would provide. Agares taught languages and caused earthquakes. Azael taught how to bring celestial objects closer to Earth, which is terrifying. Azazel taught men how to make swords and shields, and women how to beautify the eyelids, which is obviously dizzyingly sexist, but then how many of you can do both of those things? And Penemue taught writing and would cure stupidity in humanity, and I'm just going to stop you right there. Cure stupidity in humanity? I admit that I've heard bad things about demon summoning, but you've got my attention. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let us return to their Lord and Master. Satan, as a Christian concept, began right at the beginning of Christianity itself, and there are few religions or cosmologies that have anything really a whole lot like him. Islam has Iblis, or Shaitan, who is similar but historically less important to the faith. Judaism, Buddhism, and Hinduism have no very important analog, and though evil deities appear in some pagan polytheisms, their deities tend to be more ambiguous in general. The Greek Hades is sometimes compared to Satan, but they are only similar in that both rule the underworld, which is for the most part a gray place in ancient Greece and not punitive, and Hades is not a villain. Indeed, the number of women Hades abducts for sexual purposes is exactly one, which is well below the average for the Greek deities. And to imagine that a civilization founded largely on this culture would, millennia later, have terrible problems with sexual assault. The Norse Hel also ruled a gray, sad afterlife, though she did lend her name to the Christian Inferno, altered slightly, as in Hel's case it was H.E. single hockey stick. I told this joke a couple weeks ago. It's worth telling again. She is sometimes called Hela these days to distinguish her from the Christian concept, and I was very eagerly awaiting goth outer space Kate Blanchett, but I did not expect this to become my new sexual preference. Closer to the lands of the Bible, we have the Egyptians, whose underworld ruler Osiris was a benevolent judge. Perhaps more similar to Satan was Set, generally held to be the god of evil. Here are his followers from the first edition Deities and Demigods book for Dungeons and Dragons. See, they're bad news. But even Set, in some stories, protected the barge of the sun as it passed through the underworld every night and was assaulted by the giant serpent Apep. A lot was going on around you in ancient Egypt that wasn't at all true. The first god of pure evil appears to have been Ahriman from the Zoroastrian faith, also called Mazdaism. This was founded by the prophet Zarathustra, who lived in 1700 BC, or 1200 BC, or 700 BC, or something. His mother, Dugdova, had been infused with the element of Quar, the glory of creation. Later, her husband made her a drink made of milk and certain herbs, I believe technically a smoothie, and this combined with the Quar caused the creation of Zarathustra, a virgin birth. He would then prophesize, among other things, a world-ending final battle between good and evil. You see where I'm going with this. Zoroastrianism is thin on the ground in these days, but its ideas were big. And it gave us a dualistic universe. Ormazd, or Ahura Mazda, was the deity of good. Ahriman, his brother, was the one of evil. Ahriman was in charge of lust, destruction, lies, violence, drought, disease, death, also scorpions, all that sort of thing. For the first time, good and evil existed as part of the construction of the universe. The next major step in the development of the concept of Satan came from a source little used by modern American Christianity. I speak, of course, of the Bible. Seriously, you're not allowed to shave or wear blended cloth. Even in the relatively consistent New Testament, Jesus curses a fig tree forever for being out of season. I'm not here to disparage Christianity. It has done numberless people incalculable good. But the Bible itself is super weird if you read it, and much of the Christian religion as we understand it is based on non-biblical traditions. For example, Satan. He appears in the Old Testament basically in one of two ways, as the Hebrew word for adversary, and as such several humans are Satans, but it's not the big deal that it sounds like to us. And, as most famously in the book of Job, as an actual agent of God sent to test humans. God's chosen adversary for us. There is no master of evil in the Old Testament. Some have argued that with God's vengeful behavior in this book, there's hardly a need for him. It is God himself who hardens the heart of Pharaoh against the Israelites. And elsewhere, God said to Abraham, "Kill me a son." Abe said, "Man, you must be putting me on." God said, "No." Abe said, "What?" God said, "You can do what you want, Abe, but the next time you see me coming, you better run." I'm sorry. I'm really sorry about that. In the New Testament, we see a bit more of the devil we know. He tempts Jesus in the desert, promising him lordship over the earth and apparently never having to comb his hair anymore. The devil is now the lord of the mortal world, you see. And in Revelations, a seven-headed dragon is cast out of heaven, which is generally taken to be the fall of Lucifer, though of course it occurs in a book describing the end of the world, so that seems kind of late in the timeline. Look, everyone's been very busy. You can't always be on time for everything. In fact, the timing of the fall from heaven would move around quite a lot in the Christian tradition. Sometimes it was in the very instant after creation, sometimes after the creation of Adam, spurred by the devil's jealousy of the first man in his sweet garden. And sometimes at the end of the world, which leaves some unanswered question, but there you have it. It's no surprise, really, that there should be such variants. We've had Spider-Man for 58 years, and how many versions of him are there? 1,000,000? You have to expect 2,000 years of Christian thought to have some variation. One thing that the biblical Satan is not is the Lord of Hell. Hell in the Bible is the lake of fire, where there will be much weeping and gnashing of teeth. This lake of fire is super irritating. But there aren't a lot of additional specifics. Well, we'll soon fix that. Hell would, of course, become an impossibly important concept to the religion, and indeed, at its core, Jesus' sacrifice is to save us from it. Nevertheless, there were a lot of competing ideas about it early on. There was the eternal damnation that we all know and love, but even in the beginning, there were those who thought that a few decades of stealing goats and having impure thoughts about the gender of your preference, being punished by a literal eternity of savage torture, was perhaps unfair and unbecoming of a kindly deity. And so in the 1st century AD, Saul of Tarsus, who renamed himself Paul, devised what would come to be known as annihilation theory, this being that unsaved souls simply cease to exist upon death. Later in the 3rd century, the writer Origen came up with the idea called apocastastasis, because he believed that if you're going to invent religion words, you needed to invent the crap out of religion words. Apocastastasis was nothing less than universal salvation. Everything is ultimately redeemed, even ultimately Satan himself. Hell exists, but it is at worst a purgatory, a temporary thing. It was a beautiful and kind idea, and nobody liked it. It was felt that if everyone was ultimately saved anyway, then the crucifixion was meaningless, though, speaking only for myself, I would actually take immediate heaven over even a brief hell. But moreover, hell had other uses here on earth. It was not a corrective or cure for sin, but a deterrent, and of vengeance. Around this time, a concept that Christianity would promote, which would later come to be called abominable fancy, held that among the joys of heaven was the opportunity to observe the tortures of the damned in hell. And okay, the gladiator battles and such were still happening. Entertainment in those days wasn't night court, but guys. So the first few centuries of Christianity were a time for trying out ideas. The roles we give to Satan, fallen angel, instigator of evil, and lord of hell, aren't always consolidated at this point. Sometimes Lucifer falls into a hell already ruled by Satan, who himself tempts men. At other times, Lucifer is the source of evil, but hell is ruled by someone else, Hades perhaps. In the 2nd century, Justin Martyr declares that the serpent in Eden had been the devil, a new idea at that time. In the 3rd century, the writer Tertullian declared that a number of previously unspecified things were of Satan. Astrology, magic, horse races, bathhouses, taverns, and theaters, writing specifically of the latter. Whoever enters into communion with the devil by going to shows separates himself from the Lord. And I'm pretty sure this would count, so, sorry, guys. The 6th century saw the apocryphal Gospel of Nicodemus, which discussed the harrowing of hell, which was when Jesus, while temporarily dead, descended into hell and there redeemed the souls that could not have been before he existed. This does not occur in the actual Bible, but had long since been a traditional story, which included Satan being helpless to stop him, and the detail that this happened from Friday afternoon to Sunday morning, and we have all had those weekends, am I right? The Gospel of Nicodemus specifies that Jesus wrestles Satan after bursting into hell in an explosion of light, yelling, "Let the King of Glory in!" It is not recorded what his entrance music was, though I'm going to go with Sabotage by the Beastie Boys. Author of all lies, I'm coming for you! Grudge match! Also around this time was the Gnostic heresy. According to this, the true God had numerous emanations, and the lowest of these was named Sophia. Sophia created an entity called the Demiurge, or alternately Ialdabaoth, or alternately Jim. And this entity created the physical world, and would be the vengeful God of the Old Testament, and the devil of the New. All matter was evil, and Jesus' appearance on earth was his harrowing of hell. In fact, he was not of matter himself, too divine to be so, but rather was an illusion with -2 on the saving throw to disbelieve. Well, this didn't catch on, and by the Middle Ages, things began to settle down. Conceptually, anyway, things were still pretty tense in day-to-day life, what with all the illiteracy and leprosy and people turning right into wolves. Satan was fallen angel, author of all evil, and king of hell all at once now, but there were still a few developments. The scholastics, for example, in the 11th and 12th centuries, defined why it was that Satan himself could not be redeemed. He had never been tempted, for one thing, and also angels were incapable of learning, while simultaneously Lucifer's sin was greater than humanity's because of Lucifer's greater intellect, and it is all kind of confusing and contradictory, and maybe we'd understand it if we were as smart as Lucifer, though we wouldn't be able to learn anything about it. Who knows what's going on? Also, Christ's sacrifice was specifically only for the redemption of humanity, much as tricks are only for kids. In the 12th century French book Aucassin and Nicolette, a nobleman is warned against extramarital sex and declares that hell frankly sounds more interesting than heaven anyway. This was, of course, a vile heresy, and would, of course, be repeated 11 kabillion hojillion times over the next 800 years. The 13th century story Saint-Pierre et le Jongleur tells the story of a juggler in hell gambling all the damned souls to St. Peter while the devils are all away gathering souls. Returning, Satan is incensed and declares that he will allow no more jugglers into hell. That'll teach him. Also, this explains the well-known phenomenon of dead, unrepentant jugglers walking the earth forever in a shambling mockery of life. The 14th century saw a vogue in the distribution of letters from Satan to various priests, thanking them for their loyal service. This was, of course, a vicious satire. The priests were thanked for gossiping. Oh, no, heavens, no, gossiping. And for judging. Wait a minute. Priests? And also for religious violence, which is fair enough. Also, during the Middle Ages was the distribution of the Vision of Tyndall. In this, a dying knight is taken on a tour of hell. At its lower level was the enemy of man, who was enormous, with a bird's beak, a hairy body, thousands of arms, each with lance-length, razor-sharp nails, and a long, spiky tail. He lay writhing on a bed of hot coals, tearing at souls with his hands and breathing them in and out in clouds from his mouth. Picturesque, but not entirely atypical of depictions of the devil from this period, especially in his being enormous, monstrous, and kind of weirdly helpless. Though he had tempted Jesus and continually caused humanity to sin, the suave Mephistopheles was yet to come. So too were the horns and the hooves, which would be lifted from the Greek god Pan in the 12th century. Indeed, at this time, one was advised to tell Satan apart from Pan by Pan's having some pipes. Does anyone else remember Zamfir, master of the pan flute? No? That is probably okay. But before this, depictions of Satan appear to have been one of an artist's best options for creativity. Oh, don't get me wrong, it starts off boring. This is believed to be the first surviving image of Lucifer, the fallen angel, from the Ravenna Basilica of the 6th century. He's the blue one. Blue. But then people start going all out, each artist giving him their own ideas. Many were bestial. Satan was associated with serpents because of Eden, dragons because of Revelation, goats later because of Pan, and often dogs. Because apparently we think dogs are evil. What is the matter with us? First abominable fancy, and now this. And this creativity, this variety of depictions, extended out to demons in general. We see here the temptation of Saint Anthony, which is rather a different use of the word temptation than that to which we are used. Saint Anthony seems to be taking it all pretty well, though. Satan often had a face on his stomach, knees, or butt. Sometimes he was lame from the fall, which, given its distance from heaven to hell, is frankly some pretty good luck. And all of these depictions could be true, or none of them, because of course he was a shape changer as well. All to lead people astray, of course, but also totally sweet. I want to be the devil now. The Middle Ages were also the time of the mystery plays. Mystery in an old sense of the word meaning service, as in religious service. These were huge productions of the stories of Christianity intended for the illiterate flock. And of course, the devil had his role. Indeed, many of them included a huge reproduced hellmouth. In those days, the gates of hell were often supplanted by a giant bestial maw in order to better, devour you. The set design for these plays was often huge. One used the jawbone of a beached whale for the hellmouth. This was important stuff. Typically, we would see the story of the fall of Lucifer. He would sit bragging on God's throne, but then be cast into the hellmouth, where he would often express his contempt for what was happening to him by saying, "For fear of fire, a fart I crack." The majesty and the dignity of the church is so important. Oh, I make gentle sport, but we are here seeing a legitimate cultural phenomenon in which the devil is turned into low comedy, doubtless as a respite from the intensely heavy hellfire sermons of the time. Later in the mystery plays, we see him become the serpent of Eden, saying, "I shall take a virgin's face and the body and feet of a serpent, and guys, you all just need to take a closer look at serpents is all." One version later refers to him attempting to tempt the Virgin Mary 100,000 times, and though you have to admire his dedication, one imagines that this must have gotten tedious for both of them. How about some gold? No, Gold again? No! For the literate of the period, there was what was called vision literature, which were popular written accounts of people's visions of being taken on tours of hell. There were lots of these, and they were very popular, serving the twin functions taken up in the modern day by horror movies and UFO reports: morbid fascination with darkness and with unexplained phenomena, though this later had less oomph than it does now. This is all because the mechanical universe we know now, this is all before the mechanical universe we know now, when supernatural explanations were expected and necessary. We didn't know what the stars were. We were morons. Still, this did allow for a Satan who causes all bad thoughts while writhing on coals at the bottom of hell. This wasn't a weird contradiction, because nobody really gave it any thought, and if they did, magic! Remarkably, we have a pretty good idea of what killed off the vision literature, and this was its being supplanted by Dante's Inferno, completed in 1320. Technically, what we're talking about is the first part of the Divine Comedy, the second and third parts being Purgatorio and Paradiso, but nobody cares about that because they are super boring. But Inferno has centaurs and Medusa in it, in part doubtless because it was based heavily on Plato's descriptions of Hades. Centaurs! What could be more hellish? And at the bottom of the giant inverted cone that was hell was Satan, enormous, hairy, and frozen to his waist in a lake of ice. He has 3 faces, each forever chewing on a particularly vile sinner. One Judas, another Brutus, and the third Cassius. Yeah, take that, Cassius. It's about time someone took him down a peg. Satan is ever crying, but the wings around his faces flap uselessly, spreading the cold wind from the ice all around the lower hell. Though previous to this, one could design the devil how you liked without need of detailed explanation, here the scholarship informs us that he is hairy, because the devil in the mystery plays is usually hairy, and that he has an extra face on either side of his head as a reference to pictures of the devil with snakes coming out of his ears. And the devil has been depicted with snakes coming out of his ears for a number of good and well-known reasons, and that number, say it with me, is 0. And of course, we must not speak of the devil in the Middle Ages without stopping off in witchcraft. Witchcraft! Perhaps the most famous, indeed the most iconic of all the West's techniques of destroying women for the crime of being women, which is of course saying quite a lot. To hear them talk in the 14th through 16th centuries, hardly a village in Europe was untroubled by a cabal of sorceresses in service to the evil one. I'm glad you're all sitting down because I'm about to tell you something startling. There is actually very little historical evidence that this is true. There are plenty of confessions, yes, nearly all of them gotten after lengthy and unimaginable torture, which is, of course, when people are at their most frank and honest. The story is obviously varied wildly, but here's a version with a lot of the common themes. On a Thursday or a Saturday, the witches will walk to a secret place, or fly by means of a magic salve. This explained all the flying women you would see in those days. To a secret place. Sometimes the first among the fallen would give them a ride. That's cool, he doesn't need gas money. There they will kiss the anus or genitals of a he-goat, or of Satan himself when he shows up. He's very busy, but he does make time for his fans. And then it's time to sacrifice the children that have been brought as a kind of hazing for any new recruits, and to use that fat to make flying salves or poison, because babies in the Middle Ages were extremely toxic. The children's flesh would be eaten in a parody of the Eucharist, and then it was time for the orgy. Evil. Pure evil. The 16th century saw a major development in the history of Old Nick. Surprisingly, perhaps, this was not the Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther didn't have much to say about Satan. The early Protestants denied the fall of Lucifer and just really anything that was into free will in general. Everything was predestined. Only belief would save you, and good works were for nothing. There was no purgatory. There could be no prayers for the dead. And the soul was but a horse that God or the devil would ride upon in turn. Not literally. That would be weird. The historical European Catholics are sometimes thought badly of, what with the Inquisition and the sending children to the Holy Land to take it back with their innocence, and instead they all got sold into slavery, but it's not like the Lutherans were a million laughs themselves. This schism between the Christians did give us stuff like this, a Lutheran depiction of the papist devil, and this, a Catholic depiction of a priest marrying a Protestant fool to the devil, which is all more or less exactly what the concept of the devil is for. Taking people very similar to you, but insufficiently so, and demonstrating that they are pure evil. But the bigger event for the devil was the publication in the 1580s of Christopher Marlowe's Dr. Faustus. This is a story we all know. An occultist makes a pact with Mephistopheles, a devil in the service of Satan here, but very much a stand-in all honesty, and later taken as the same entity, for great knowledge. They write a pact in blood in which Faust agrees to renounce and subvert Christianity and is rewarded with knowledge and 24 years of indulgence, at the end of which his soul will be taken to hell. Toward the end of the 24 years, the scholar begins to get nervous, perhaps understandably, and Mephisto takes him on a tour of hell, which, unthinkably, doesn't help. Still, Faust refuses to ask forgiveness, though he does warn some young people not to do as he has done, later echoed in the Danzig song Mother. One imagines the young people responding, "Okay, don't sign our souls over to eternal damnation. Check. Way ahead of you, in fact." Regardless, Faust's 24 years end, and down he goes. This was not the first pact with the devil story. The 6th century cleric Theophilus, cast out of the church over his opposition to a new bishop, was said to have written a pact in blood. Empowered by this, he accused the new bishop of telling falsehoods, which was something you could get in trouble for in a major leadership position in those days. He is installed as the new bishop. Satan eventually comes for him, but the Blessed Virgin Mary intercedes and tells him that God will pardon Theophilus if he confesses and lives well. And the moral of that is, you can literally make signed deals with Lucifer so long as you live long enough to say you're really sorry. And Marlowe was inspired by this story and a few others like it, as well as the real Johann Faust, an occultist and charlatan who had lived in Heidelberg in the first part of the 1500s. This Faust was not imagined during his time to have made any business transactions with the Lake of Fire, but nobody's perfect. But if Marlowe's inspirations were fairly limited, his influence was incalculable. Almost immediately, the drawing up of contracts became the Lord of Lies' primary steez, which is a word that was popular like 10 or 15 years ago, meaning modus operandi. I needed someone to explain it to me. The witch hunts swiftly started producing them as evidence in the majority of their cases. Here we see one from the trial of Urbain Grandier, a Catholic priest burned at the stake for witchcraft in 1634. He had been openly and flagrantly against the priestly vow of celibacy, and also was a critic of Cardinal Richelieu, and so we learned that accusing people of witchcraft was a handy way to just get rid of anybody you didn't like. The pact is written backwards and in Latin, and it reads, "We, the influential Lucifer, the young Satan, Beelzebub, Leviathan, Elamai, and Astaroth, together with others, have today accepted the covenant pact of Urbain Grandier, who is ours. And him do we promise the love of women, the flower of virgins, the respect of monarchs, honors, lusts, and powers. He will go whoring 3 days long. The carousal will be dear to him. He offers us once in the year a seal of blood. Under the feet will he trample the holy things of the church, and he will ask us many questions. With this pact he will live 20 years happy on the earth of man, and will later join us to sin against God. Bound in hell in the council of demons, Lucifer, Beelzebub, Satan, Astaroth, Leviathan, Elamai, the seals placed by the devil, the master, and the demons, princes of the Lord, Bealberith, writer." Well, can't argue with that. I mean, there it is in black and white. That's just some facts. And of course, the Faust story has been retold endlessly, perhaps more so than any other story of the devil. Goethe's 19th century Faust, a Tragedy, adds a number of elements, including it all starting as a wager between God and the devil, Satan and Mephistopheles being expressly the same here, over whether Faust may be corrupted. In this version, he starts out as a man of seemingly unimpeachable virtue. He is a scholar as well, but upon signing the deal gives himself over to sensuality. He impregnates and abandons a woman named Gretchen, who then drowns the baby and is executed for it. Well, Faust feels super bad about that, and this penitence saves his soul. So thanks, Gretchen. Thanks for all that getting abandoned and dying. You prevented me from making a big mistake. Worth noting is that this version's suave Mephistopheles has a single hoof, which is thought to be a reference to the club foot of George Gordon, Lord Byron, famed romantic poet and passionate advocate of his own penis. It is also believed by some that he was the model for Victor Frankenstein, and it is certainly true that the title character of John Polidori's The Vampire, which invented the suave aristocratic vampire motif in modern fiction, is based on Byron as well. What I mean to tell you is that like 60% of the modern horror genre is based on Lord Byron being a giant D-bag. Faust is always a scholar, but in Marlowe a secular one, bent on learning things for himself rather than relying upon grace, and obviously we can't have that. This is indeed the reason for his fall in Marlowe's version. It is a rigorously anti-intellectual piece. Goethe's virtuous man gives us a more interesting distance to fall, though it does cast one oddity of the pact story into harsh relief. Okay, sure, make a deal with a virtuous person, but in other cases, why even bother offering anything in exchange for the souls of most people? Aren't most people handing their souls over pretty freely anyway? The devil's job just can't be that hard, is all, and maybe he can save himself some paperwork. On the other hand, maybe he just likes paperwork. He is, after all, the devil. Of course, we're not really meant to think of things from this point of view. The pact is, of course, a symbol of the deals we all make with the wicked world, or with what we perceive as our own bad sides, in order to get what we want, or even just stay alive. And we all make them, all the time. Many of us, for example, spend up to 40 hours a week doing things that we would never imagine doing in our free time, and it eats slowly away at us, but it's a deal that we make. On a more specifically Christian level, this all demonstrates the rather important principle that the devil does not have direct power over us. He can only suggest, not compel. Except when he out and out possesses people, of course, which he did quite a lot. In The Exorcist, they say that possessing demons don't generally claim to be Satan himself, but this is not true. In the olden days, most people getting possessed were getting possessed by the devil himself, demonstrating another important religious principle. Satan has a lot of time on his hands. Which puts one in mind, tangentially, of the old aphorism, idle hands are the devil's playground, an admonition that is so important, that it is so important to your soul that you never, ever relax at all. The 17th century saw the decline in the witchcraft phenomenon, though it did have one last flourish in Isabel Gowdy, a Scottish woman who confessed to witchcraft in 1662. And here's the thing. She did so spontaneously, without benefit of torture, and people barely knew what to do. And she brought all sorts of new material to the table. She'd had sex with Satan, like usual, but she revealed that his Johnson was enormous and icy, which nobody had ever even thought about. The coven, she revealed, engaged in Christian hunting, which was like fox hunting or deer hunting, and which, like the constant child abduction of most witchcraft narratives, was the sort of thing that you would think someone would have noticed before this, but that's probably not important. Her coven name, the name by which she practiced the dark arts, was Janet. Janet. And she even told of a spell by which means she would change into a rabbit, which went something like this. I shall go into a hare, with sorrow and such and mickle care, and I shall go in the devil's name, while I come home again. I'm a rabbit now, right? I'm just going to do the rest of the talk as a rabbit, which is what I am now. But again, the most important satanic development of the century was literary. In this case, John Milton's Paradise Lost, once condensed into haiku form as maybe the devil has reasons for his actions and is real chatty. It begins with the newly fallen Lucifer, still noble and beautiful, addressing his similarly fallen comrades with such heartening bromides as better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell and a hell of heaven. And farewell, happy fields where joy forever dwells. Hail, horrors, hail. He was trying to make the best of a bad situation. It's the power of positive thinking. The fallen debate their next course of action. Moloch wants to continue the war. Belial feels they need to adapt to their new surroundings. Mammon takes it a step further and wants to take up mining to gain access to the riches of hell. Presumably he wants to buy a new car or something. And Beelzebub, Lucifer's prime minister, supports him in his desire to corrupt the first humans. Lucifer somehow creates a daughter named Sin, who looks like this, and hence is obviously bad news. He incestuously begets death with her, and the three form a sort of unholy trinity. Lucifer possesses a serpent in Eden and convinces Eve to eat of the fruit of knowledge, lying that it will make her and Adam the equals of God. She does. Spoiler alert. I'm really sorry, maybe you were going to read that. This, then, is the most iconic version of the story of the fall of the rebel angels, and thus the origin of evil. Usually this rebellion is of Lucifer's own free will, though in those theologies emphasizing predestination, free will doesn't really exist, and as such he did not fall so much as was pushed. Sometimes he does it out of jealousy of Adam and God's love for him, less frequently due to the same, later on, for Jesus. Most often, though, he seeks to place himself as the equal of God, in one telling even setting up his own throne in the northwest of heaven, which, the where now? And this pride is what casts him down. The source of evil is Lucifer not knowing his place, or even just wanting to be in a better place than he was. Now, in the Middle Ages, this kind of disloyalty, this kind of railing against one's place in society, well, this was the biggest sin anyone could think of, or at least the sin anyone could think of that the people telling the stories wanted you to think was the biggest. But as Western society moved into the Enlightenment and the Renaissance, rebellion against those who have held themselves above you began to take on a kind of attraction, and hence Milton's tragic, charismatic Satan. As Lucifer became more sympathetic, so too did he lose some of his power. During the Enlightenment, as the universe became mechanical, predictable, a scientific universe, use for the supernatural began to wane, and as such atheism became a thing for the first time. Obviously, it didn't take over, and the mechanical universe sometimes combines with the religious one oddly. In 1714, the writer Tobias Swindon concluded that hell could not have been inside the earth, as there was not enough room in there for all the damned souls of history, and further, there wouldn't be enough oxygen to keep the fires burning. And he concluded, therefore, that hell must be in the sun. The sun was hell. And we live in a scary universe, it's true, but everybody calm down. About 100 years later came the end of the life of the famous Marquis de Sade, the famous self-indulger and mean person after whom sadism is named. Many have claimed that he was the logical, inevitable result of the rising atheism of the time, which of course has since been borne out by the increasing commonality of atheism and everybody being constantly murdered. Only the fear of God and or Satan, we are told, keeps everybody from being the Marquis de Sade, and this, I feel, tells us more about the people saying it than the universal human condition. If you meet someone saying this at a party, talk to someone else. Yes, atheism destroys society, assuming there's no such thing as compassion, and of course there isn't. What does that word even mean? The Romantic writers use Satan as an example of rebellion against tyranny. One of their greatest, the aforementioned Lord Byron, published in 1821 an epic poem entitled Cain, in which he proposed that the enormous fossils of recent interest to science, but not really understood as yet, were the bones of a gigantic ancient race that had rebelled against a petty god who had then exiled them into outer space, and that was the real story of the fall of Lucifer. And I have spoken ill of Byron here, but he did write a story about dinosaur supermen and space hell, and for that we must obviously praise him. After the death of the poet Victor Hugo in 1885, an unfinished manuscript was found among his papers entitled La Fin de Satan, or The End of Satan. This begins with the fall. As Satan falls, the stars go out for him, until there is but one left. He flies towards it for 10,000 years, until at last it goes out, as he cries out to it in anguish. This devil's hell is simply the memory of heaven. He still loves God, and the flames are his desire to return to him. But his pride is too strong, and he knows this, and this realization that his damnation is and continues to be his own fault only amplifies his agony. It is one of the most purely sympathetic portrayals of the character, the devil as the saddest entity in existence. And so we come, more or less, to the 20th century and its appalling red-headed stepchild, the 21st century. Certainly atheism is more common than ever, but we mustn't imagine it dominates society. Every single American president, for example, has at least claimed to be a Christian and had to get the job. And the devil, of course, is as popular as ever. The number of devils and proposals about his nature during this time is, of course, endless. In music, it is proposed that Satan is the puppeteer of humanity and is in turn puppeteered by Eddie, Iron Maiden's mascot. The Charlie Daniels Band gives us a devil who was looking for a soul to steal. He was in a bind because he was way behind and he was looking to make a deal, creating the remarkable idea that the devil has some sort of quota that he needs to keep up with, which is presumably overseen by God, as there would be no one else to do so, which is a surprisingly dark theological implication for a song about fiddling. In The Devil and Homer Simpson, Satan turns out to be Ned Flanders, saying that it's always who you least expect, a perfectly sophisticated commentary on evil. He appears in a number of Twilight Zone episodes, played by Burgess Meredith on one occasion and by Julie Newmar in another, demonstrating that Satan is incredibly charming one way or the other, and also that he fights Batman. And in the 1966 Japanese series Akuma-kun, a small boy fights various bizarro monsters with the help of his pal, the Devil. I near the end of my time and cannot give Akuma-kun the attention it deserves, but look for my upcoming talk in which I just go on and on about Akuma-kun for a solid hour. You think I'm joking. And cinema, well, again, there are literally hundreds to choose from. Two especially popular cinematic devils are Tim Curry's from the otherwise forgettable film Legend, but then Tim Curry is an amazing actor, and also in this case has enormous crazy horns! The other is Louis Cypher from Angel Heart, played by Robert De Niro as calm, urbane, and very, very seated. He nevertheless has an almost mesmerizing, reserved power to him. Beyond this, the devil has been played by Viggo Mortensen, Al Pacino, Jeffrey Jones, George Burns, Jerry Lewis, and perhaps most regrettably, Bill Cosby. A dark smudge on the character of Satan. But for all this plurality, Satan remains. Indeed, I never bothered to define our terms here, because we all know what the devil is, whether he be a three-faced helpless thing or Julie Newmar. He is the Lord of evil, its master and its source. He is the folk answer to the problem of theodicy, not the Greek epic or the Honda Odyssey, but the question of how an omnipotent, benevolent God can allow evil. On the simplest level, he doesn't. Satan rebelled and creates evil, but if God is omnipotent, even Satan can only act as God allows. This question has been a serious one for Christian theologians for 2,000 years, and if you'd like to read a book on the subject, don't. It is a subject that is so boring. Basically, people repeating the same 2 or 3 arguments for centuries, and none of them ever really finishing off the argument in a definitive way. Easier, then, to go with the soft polytheism of Satan. What, then, is evil? Well, short answer, it's things people are doing that you don't like, and more rarely, things that you are doing that you don't like. And it is for this reason that we have not discussed the various evils that the devil represents here, as talking about stuff you'd rather weren't happening consists of 80% of all language use since the dawn of time. Difficult to summarize. But the Christian evil is absolute and entirely condemnatory. Most religions in history have gone without a devil, and as such they create a more ambiguous universe, and one without a scapegoat, no devil to make you do it. The devil's evil, an outside thing that we don't need or want to understand, rather than a set of behaviors, might be a dangerous way of thinking about things. Rapists, for example, we all agree that they exist and that they are terrible, that precautions must be made to avoid them. But when they are called out individually, given a human face, the people who know them can't seem to handle it. No, we're talking about pure evil. This human that I know can't be evil. Make something into a metaphysical boogeyman, and you cease to understand how it is real. But then there is certainly an aspect of the devil that is not about condemning him. To some, he is a rebel against tyranny, a heroic revolutionary. To others, a tragic figure bound by his own character defects, and who among us can't understand that? But even without rewrites such as these, he is always the ultimate outsider, enraged at a world that he is not a part of, that has shunned him. It's no way to live. But if you don't have at least a little sympathy for this point of view, then, well, I'm sure you also have some good qualities. Thank you. The devil, everybody. Let me just switch some things around here, and we will have the Q&A. Thanks so much for being here. Please contribute if you can. There should be a thing right below the screen where you can click to donate. I would love that very much. If you have my email or my phone number, you can do that straight through PayPal. And I'm Matthew Kessen, Kessen, on Venmo. I'm giving it away if you want, but I appreciate the donations. RevMattsMonsterScience.com and Facebook and Instagram and all of that. Follow me. I've got daily content. Tell your friends, please. I'd love to get this in front of more people. Daily content, like I said, every Thursday at 8 o'clock. Next Thursday is Humongous Tales of Giants and Trolls, the third of my trilogy of Norse mythology and legend. So that'll be fun. Let's see. No, you're not shaming me for not mentioning specific devils. There's so many of them. I am not accepting shaming for not mentioning specific devils. So I'm going to scroll up and look at stuff. Boy, yeah, there's a lot of stuff here. Okay, maybe I won't look at all that stuff because there's a lot of it. Let's see. Hellboy, yes. Yeah, I've got a thing where I might do some Hellboy stuff. Just a second. Satan's actually dead in Hellboy. Yeah. Thank you all so much. Thank you very much. Okay, all right. Let's get to the queue. Okay. Thank you so much, everybody. What about Tom Ellison? Yeah, if I missed your devil, I'm not sorry, because there's literally thousands of stories about the devil, and so I just clicked some of them. How do I classify? Okay, so yeah, let's get to the questions. How do you classify Futurama's robot devil? I classify him as awesome. I love when the robot devil shows up. He almost made it into this, but it just had to not have him be there for time. Let's see. Yeah, Futurama's robot devil. I mean, I don't know what sort of. Yeah, I classify him as awesome. That is my answer. Do I have a favorite song about the devil? I really like Devil Went Down to Georgia. I think Devil Went Down to Georgia is nutty. And it is about overcoming the power of evil by being very, very good at country violin. And I don't know. It's that would have to be my favorite song about the devil. There's, I mean, also almost anything that comes out of Ozzy Osbourne's mouth. You don't devil shame in Monster Science? No. What's your favorite portrayal of the devil in cinema? I mentioned him because he is my favorite. I just love the crap out of De Niro's devil in Angel Heart. He's so polite, and so it doesn't like any. I don't like any sort of fuss, he says, and yet so evil. So he just sits there speaking politely in his beard and his suit, and is terrifying, and I don't know how it works, and it is my favorite. Let's see. With the heavy male modeling content in your videos lately, I'm surprised we didn't get to see those surprisingly hot church sculptures of Lucifer. Yeah, I threw in some of the illustrations from Paradise Lost. I mean, he's pretty cut in those. He's holding himself in exciting positions. Best represented the devil on screen. Already did that. Have you sold your soul to the devil yet? No, there isn't any such thing as the devil. Best devil in cartoons, not robot devil. No, I don't think. Cartoon. Now we mean animated cartoons is what you mean, I suppose. Let's see. I'm kind of looking over at my DVD collection, which is right over here, to kind of give myself clues. Yeah, because you said beside the Robot Devil, I would go with Robot Devil because Robot Devil is amazing. So yeah, I'm gonna come back to you on that one because it's not springing to mind, but yeah, let me think about that a little bit. Got an opinion on Stephen Lynch's song Beals? I do not, I'm afraid, because I don't know it. Thoughts on Lucifer the TV show? Wait, no, it's just pretty. I have not watched Lucifer the TV show. I mean, it's based on the comics, and I haven't read the Lucifer comics, but I have read the Sandman comics that the Lucifer comics come from, and they are, of course, very good. Gaiman does a very, very interesting Satan, though his is largely based on Alan Moore's in the first place. I do recommend all the old Vertigo stuff about hell. It is neat and fun. Okay. One of these days, I am going to recruit somebody to help me with this. Any thoughts on Satan's stats in D&D? Somebody else? Okay, hold on. Oh wait, I skipped ahead. Thoughts on South Park Satan? South Park Satan is funny. The big, I mean, he's sort of the heavy metal Satan, or the heavy metal imaginary Satan, and is funny. It's a good gag, and a gag that sustains itself. So yeah, no, I got no fight. It's a good one. Any thoughts on Satan stats in D&D? Did he make it into the Fiend folio? Yeah, there's never. I mean, there's an Asmodeus. There's various devil analogs that have stats, and then you can go hit him with a sword enough times until he dies. Although it has to be a bunch of times. I don't know officially in the D&D that I pay attention to, which is old D&D because I'm old. There were never Satan stats. There were a million demons and devils, and they got in trouble for having demons and devils in their books, and so they dialed it back in second edition, and they had all the same monsters, and they lived in fiery evil dimensions, but they were called some other damn thing, and it was the silliest thing, and they fixed it. So that's good. Fantasia Devil, not a question, but yes, the Fantasia Devil is terrific. That's supposed to be Chernobog, a Russian devil, which is a big fan. How many of you have sold your souls to Matt? Yeah. How many of you have sold your souls to Matt? Not enough. That's the answer. Favorite moniker of the devil? Morningstar, Old Scratch, other names. Usually when I have the time, I like just referring to him as the author of all lies, because it's just, I don't know, it's simultaneously grandiose and kind of trivial. I mean, lies are bad, but yeah, I like the author of all lies very much is my favorite. I also like Old Nick. I only rent to Matt from time to time. Yeah, and I take care of it. Your soul, I give it back in good condition. Actually, the devil Hades from Rites of Spring is pretty good. Yeah, yep, absolutely. Have you seen any indication that three-headed devil is taken from the Slavic deity, something that has changed? Just a second. From the Slavic deity Triglav. I have not. As I hope I've made it somewhat clear, I did a bunch of reading for this, and that name did not come up, I'm afraid, but could very well be. And then, of course, there's the triplicate is very big in Greece as well, and there's a lot of stuff. Triglav, yells Jenna very excitedly. When doing your research, were there any quirky stories you read about the devil that didn't make it into your show? Now, all the really fun ones, like the thing about the sun being hell was not really important to the general thread of the show, but was the sun is hell. No, the quirky ones went in. All my favorites went in. Are babies today more or less toxic than babies in the Middle Ages? Can they be used as pesticide? Well, less, but still yes. Yeah, I mean they're no longer toxic to humans. If you eat a baby, you are not poisoned, but insects will in fact be killed by babies. Would you trans your souls in better conditions than when you get them? Yeah, I try to be nice. Today's babies are far more toxic from personal experience. Yeah, but these are medieval babies, guys. Medieval babies are a mess. Medieval babies are a nightmare. So yeah. How does one distinguish between jugglers shambling about in a mockery of life versus jugglers who are just doing their thing? That is it. See, that's absolutely correct. That is the advanced class. I mean, emphasis on the shambling mockery. If they don't seem to care whether you applaud, I think that's when you really know that they're the living dead that walk. So yes. So yeah, this was a fun one. I first did this at the Twin Cities Horror Festival in 2018, and I've done it once in my late night show. It actually, good night, Karen. I actually did it just now. If you're dead inside, does the devil take an IOU? Yeah. The devil is here to make a deal. That is what we learned from Faust. The devil is here to get you, to get your soul into hell today, and he's willing to do talks. No, Slavic mythology is a giant mess. Slavic mythology is where everything. When you study myth and legend over a period of time, it winds up just drifting all over the place. Trolls are these huge giant things, or they're dwarves. I mean, the definitions of things change wildly, and nowhere is this worse than Slavic mythology. Vampires become werewolves, and werewolves become fairies, and everything just bleed. It's just this giant undifferentiated mass, and you can't tell one creature from the other. So you just tell individual stories, and they're great. They're great, fantastic stories. They're the stories that more of the modern horror genre is based on Slavic mythology than is based on Lord Byron, which is saying something. So yes, I might very well get to it. Yes, exactly. Yeah, the Slavs get stuff from the east and west and north and south, and that's a bunch of different stuff. So it changes a lot. So yeah. Yes, I actually did this show because in one of these Q&As a couple of weeks ago, someone says, "Hey, you should do a show about the devil." And I'm like, "Haha! I already have a show about the devil." So here it is. Let's see what else. Any more questions? Give me some more questions. I'm trying to think of other stuff that I did leave out, because it's this huge giant thing. Connections to the devil in numbers like 666. 666 appears once in the Bible in the book of Revelations. It is a mark put on people who are owned by the Antichrist. What 666 means, there's a couple of different interpretations, and every one of them it has something to do with what's going on in the Middle East 2,000 years ago, and has nothing to do with anything. So 666 is basically a completely arbitrary number. So that doesn't refer to anything that helps anything. Let's see. Let's 666. What knowledge would you sell your soul for? Let's see. These are good. Okay. What knowledge would you sell your soul for? I mean, none. It's a bad idea. Repeatedly, we are told that it is a bad idea unless you go back and become a Christian later, and it's not my jam. So no. I mean, I started thinking of things of, knowledge of myself that would make me truly happy, but then without the soul, that would be of no use. So bollocks. No. Let's see. Have I done a Revelations show? What a Wild Book. Yes, I did, just a couple weeks ago. Better Armageddons than this. I'll come around to it eventually, but it was just fairly recently. So yes. Okay, giant things. Deviled eggs or deviled food cake? Hard. I love both of these things, but I love deviled eggs. So deviled eggs is the answer to that. I mentioned a lot of literary works regarding the devil. If I could read just one, which should I? It's very unpopular among English majors and the like, just because of how it's written. But I really like Paradise Lost. I think Paradise Lost is a really interesting book, and it tells us a bunch of stuff about the devil as we understand him now, and it makes him sympathetic. And I really like Paradise Lost. So that is my suggestion. What my suggestion is not is that you read the books by Jeffrey Burton Russell. He's the definitive scholar on the devil, and I read them, and I couldn't have made this thing without him. His knowledge of the history of Satan is extremely complete. He also believes that Satan is literally real, and it messes up his conclusions and his thinking, as far as I'm concerned, especially when we see all of the changes that it's been through. How can you call this a literally real thing when it's so much a product of the cultures of it, of cultural change? So that's a bit of a mess. He also cannot shut up about the Odyssey. He really wants to talk about the problem of God allowing evil to happen. And like I said, it's an argument that goes nowhere. It's an argument that people have been having for 2,000 years and nobody has friggin' settled, and it's Dullsville. So do not read Jeffrey Burton Russell. He helped me, but at what cost? Oh, please, not Paradise Lost. Yeah, sorry, I didn't scroll down. Yeah, people don't like Paradise Lost, but you know, have you ever done any shows about different pantheons, is it Egyptian, Greek, or Roman, or do you plan to in the future? Yes, I did a Norse one. It wasn't on the live stream, but I've got a trilogy about Norse mythology, and I'm doing the third one next week. That'll be focused specifically on the giants, and I haven't done a lot of other mythology specific ones. I could certainly do Greek, though I feel like that information is kind of really out there. A lot of the Egyptians don't have a lot of monsters. They have the Sphinx and they have Ammit, but not a lot beyond that. And I do the monsters. 666. Maybe I said that 666 has a variety of interpretations, and the sign for Caesar is one of them, but there are other things as well. And he shows in various antichrist proposals, even that crazy Left Behind stuff, a bit too specific and a bit too far in between this show about Satan and the show about Armageddon's. Those are my that's my coverage of this. Favorite outwitting the devil story. I tie between Devil Went Down to Georgia and Jesus wrestling him. I like when you don't outwit the devil. I like when you get the better of the devil by something that has nothing to do with the spirit or the intellect. Just because we're going nuts. So yes. Okay, I'm caught up on the questions. Anyway, you can touch on the Norwegian black metal scene and their satanic one-upsmanship. The thing about modern Satanism is that it's, well, there's a lot of different manifestations of modern Satanism. There was Anton LaVey's stuff, which had some stuff that I liked in it, and then had some crypto-fascism in it. So fuck that. The stuff that the Satanic Temple is doing in America right now is sort of pushing for demanding their religious rights, and hence demonstrating the hypocrisy of people crowing about religious freedom. Wonderful. And then the metal stuff is mostly well, I mean, one thing about the Norwegian black metal stuff, see, the devil showed up in heavy metal in this weird sort of way, where in kind of the same way he showed up in old EC comics and the old horror comics in the 1950s that they got in so much trouble for, and in the same way, which is that if you listen to some of the old heavy metal lyrics about the devil, especially like Twisted Sister and some of Ozzy Osbourne stuff, it's so moralistic, so parochial, that it would make a Sunday school teacher blush. But because they put a skull on the cover, everybody freaks out, and it's very depressing. But then, of course, it became actually satanic ironically, because it was called satanic when it wasn't really. It became satanic as kind of a screw you sort of thing, and And so that's sort of the genesis of what would lead to Norwegian black metal. I mean, the thing at the end of the day, Satan is a part of the Christian religion. If you are not a Christian, then Satan becomes irrelevant, and so I feel that a lot of focusing on Satan, even as something to exalt, is sort of playing into the larger cultural hands. But yes. All the real great satanic stuff in music is backwards, of course. So yeah, so I don't know my Norwegian black metal backwards and forwards. Mine stretch the imagination, I'm afraid. But yeah, it all started off basically as a reaction to the accusation, and it remains steeped in Christian iconography, which I think is sort of weirdly ironic, frankly. I mean, there's merit to that. If you're in an overwhelmingly Christian culture, which I mean, even we in America are, though we shouldn't be, then then you're critiquing it with its own tools and with its own symbols, and that's a good thing to do under certain circumstances. I just feel like the Norwegian black metal bands are not quite operating on that level a lot of the time. I don't know. I hear good things about Ghost. I haven't listened to them yet. They're not Norwegian black metal, but they're evil, I am led to understand, and that's fun. All right. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3. Okay. Yeah, they kind of come in. Oh, there we go. Oh, thank you. Thank you for saying. Thank you for watching. Yeah, the devil is an interesting topic, to say the least. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Well, thanks so much for watching. I hope you'll join me next week and in weeks to come. Lots of great monster stuff yet to come, and thank you once again. Thank you. Thank you for saying.